Good evening. My name is Catherine Shine. I'm here and I'm going to interview Larry Roche as part of the Digital Recollections project for South Tipperary. Hello Larry, and thanks very much for agreeing to take part in our Digital Recollections project here in South Tipperary. You might just introduce yourself very briefly and just tell us a bit about maybe where you were born.
Okay, my name is Larry Roche. I was born and reared and brought up in Banshire, and I moved to this area a few years back.
You might just go back to your childhood. In what decade would you have been a very young child? What decade were you born, say?
I was born in 1938, and I can remember. I can remember in the 40s, the late 40s, and I can remember no running water, no electricity, until Father Hayes came to Banshire, and he got the electricity. So we were the first rural parish in Ireland to have DSB.
Very good. When you say that there was no running water, how would you have coped without running water? What way would you have washed or used water?
Yeah. Oh well, yeah, we had a pump at the back of the house, and that was the main supply of water. And we had tar barrels for washing the clothes and all that kind of thing, and it was softer for washing the clothes. So all the cooking was done on the fire, on the open fire. The cakes were baked. My mother, God be good to her, baked the cake every day, and the bacon and cabbage was cooked on the fire every day. And bacon and cabbage was the main dinner food at the time. Very
good. Yeah. And what might have been a typical breakfast, say, with that?
Oh, breakfast was brown bread and an egg. That would be we always had our own eggs.
And would you remember anything that you might have eaten for treats? What would have been provided?
My mother would bake a spotted deek, they used to call it, a cotton cake, and that would be what you'd call a treat in those days.
So you grew up on a farm, Larry. Could you tell me a little bit about farming, say maybe in the 40s and 50s as opposed to farming today?
Oh well, of course there's no comparison, but the farming that time was done all by horses and plough and shovels and pickaxes, and there was no tractors. Well, there was odd tractors now, but in general there was no tractors. And all the tilling was done with the horses, and the crops were set with horses, and mowing the hay with horses, and saving the hay. We had rakes, and there would be neighbours that come and help you to pike the hay and all that.
So there's a great community spirit, people helping each other.
Oh yes, always around. The local people would all come. The thrashings then, all the people would come, and that was a big day. And the women had to cook the dinner for about 12 or 14 men, and make tea in the evening for them again.
Would you say you were self-sufficient? Like, would you have had to buy in much food, or would a lot of it been provided on the farm?
Oh, it was all provided more or less on the farm. The only thing they'd buy is sugar, and when you went to the creamery you got butter. The creamery supplied butter. You got your couple of pounds of butter every week when you went with your milk. And but everything else was grown on the farm: the cabbage and the turnips and the potatoes, and the pig was killed.
Right. And
once a month, maybe if they were in Tipperary town, you might get fresh meat, like a bit of beef or mutton or something like that.
And would most people have eaten meat every day, would you think, or was it something that was only a couple of times a week that people would eat?
Oh, most people would eat meat. Well, most people now would eat meat every day. To be all bacon and cabbage. And they keep the cabbage in the evening and put the cold cabbage in between two cuts of bread.
Very good. And cabbage water for they drink. was there a fair day? You often hear about these fair days. Would you be able to tell us anything about that, or can you recall anything about the fair day?
Oh yes, I can recall. I actually sold calves in the Fair of Banshee. They used to call it the 30th of November was the Fair of Banshee, and I recall they used to call it the 30th of November, or the 30th of Banshee, sorry, they used to call it. And I can recall selling calves. It was mainly for weanling calves, but they sold cows and they sold horses and all kinds of things.
And would it be mainly men would go to the fairs, or would it be family outing? Or
No, all the men would be there, and they'd go to the pubs after, and they'd be drinking all night after.
If they made a few pound.
Whether they made it or not, they were drinking anyway, so that was part of the day. And then they moved on to, when Father Hayes came, the fair disappeared, and the mass took over, but then Father Hayes organised a show, the agricultural show, and that must be going on, was about 55 or 6 years now. That kind of replaced the fair, like the show.
Canon Hayes then was a very famous man. Did you ever meet him, or can you?
I knew Father Hayes, yeah. I knew him well, yeah.
And can you tell us anything about him, or?
Well, sure, he organised everything. He was a great man at the time. Like, you know, he got employment when they got the electricity. There was great employment for a while, because it was all manual work. They dug the holes with shovels and that, you know. They had to go down 15 feet with a hole, so too many fellas today would dig a hole 15 feet down.
All by hand, no machinery?
There was no machines, and they had to put the pole up and with 2 ropes and steady it and pack that down again, fill it up again. So there was a lot of employment.
And around what year was that, would you think?
I think it was 47, 48, so some of them years. I wouldn't be 100% sure on that number, but it was some of them years.
And would most people have got in electricity at that stage, or was it a thing that happened over maybe 10 years, gradual change?
Yeah, a lot of people were kind of afraid of it, and some people thought they mightn't be able to afford it and things like that.
And was it very expensive?
Well, it wasn't, looking back now, sure, it wasn't very expensive, but I couldn't put a figure on the money now. But.
And how did the electrification change farming for people?
Well, you could see what you're doing when you're milking the cows in winter time. But it changed it in years after with milking machines, like, and all that kind of thing, you know.
And around what year or what decade did milking machines, you know, come into use in farms?
I'd say the late 60s. The milking machines started to come into use.
So up to that was all done by hand?
All done by hand. The minute you were able to sit on a stool, you were shown how to.
And how many cows, like, would in general people have at the time? What was the average amount that in a herd, like, cows?
I suppose the average would be 10 cows. Like, you know, some people would have 20. More people might have only 4 or 5. And there was a lot of 10 and 12 cows.
And would they bring the milk to the creamery every day?
Oh yes, in the churns every day they went to the creamery. That was a social outing. You had to go and get your butter and that, and you'd have to, in the separated milk, then they'd bake with that when they'd come home. It would go sour. They'd make the cake with the separated milk. And of course the news had to be brought home. It was no good unless you brought home the news. There was no other way. Nobody ever, you know, the paper was there all right, but the local news, the fella went to the creamery.
Reading, can you recall anything about school? Your school days, maybe what you remember learning, you know, how many were in a class, a typical class, or any games you played?
Yeah, well, I think about 11 would be in a class, 11 or 12 maybe in a class. But we went to school in summertime in our bare feet, and in winter time we had to collect little kippings to light the fire. And the teacher at that time, in my case anyway, I was the eldest son on the farm, so I was earmarked for the farm, so he had much interest in me. Like he his idea was that if you sign your name and bless yourself to do once you were going to stay at home in the farm, how wrong he was, like, you know. But that was the attitude, like, but if he thought some of the rest of the family didn't need more interest in him, like, you know.
And would teachers have been strict back then? Would you have been afraid of teachers?
Oh God, you would, yeah. They were very hard.
Yeah.
Very severe.
Corporal punishment.
Oh
so.
yeah, slap the hands and knuckles in the back of the pole and all that, you know. Yeah. I always reckon myself that any few brains I had were driven out of me, hitting me in the back of the pole.
And would the majority of children have gone on to secondary school, or would a lot of them have finished up after primary school?
Well, as I said, the farmers finished up after primary school, but a lot of them went to the technical school and some of them went to the Abbey.
And education had to be paid for then, you had to pay to go
That's
to
right,
secondary school.
Yeah. And you had to cycle in 5 or 6 miles into Tipperary town.
Yeah. Do you remember any of the games you might have played in school? Any childhood games that what would you play at lunchtime, say?
There was no games, only hurling was and football mostly, but the teacher was a Corkman and he was mad about hurling. We broke a few windows, so they had to stop the hurling. But them were the most we played, like from the day you went there, you were nearly, it was all about hurling and football.
So you were very heavily involved in GAA then, was the club very important?
From a childhood you were involved because my father played and my uncles played and we went to matches everywhere, like, you know. And I can recall going to a match in Gale with my father and uncle, and we had a baby Ford car, which was a big thing to have at the time. And I can recall to see all the traps and ponies and cars along the road, and they looking in over the ditch. They didn't go in at all. They were able to stand up and look in over the ditch to see what was going on. You know? But that's going back a long time too. And
sometimes I've heard, did anybody ever cycle to the matches, or would that have been common?
I actually cycled to Thurles myself from Manchester. It's a long ways away, on a very bad road. But I only done it once, like, you know. We did. We used to cycle to the local matches in Golden and Tipperary Town, Cashel. But in the late, let's say the 60s, the late 50s, and that there was a man, Paddy Kiley, down in Tankerstown, and he had a little lorry, and he used to bring us. He'd load us all up and bring us to the matches.
And can I ask you then about evening times? A lot of the time nowadays could be spent at home, watching television, on computers, on the internet, on your phone. How did people pass their time when you were younger without televisions? And
well, in summertime we went to the field watching the senior team train. We would be at the back of the goal kicking the ball back to them, like, you know, and maybe that would be maybe 2 or 3 evenings a week. And then the crossroad down from us, they used to all meet there at night in the summertime, and they'd be playing on the road, and there was no cars much, and they'd play football and hurling on the road, and they'd play skittles, and a cold evening they'd light a fire, you know, they'd have a bit of it.
And what about the adults? What would they do?
Well, the adults would be at the cross too. Some of the adults would be at the cross, lying down in seats and lying down on the grass, you know. But
and do you remember anybody ever meeting up for a sing-song or music sessions, or would anything like that happen?
Oh yes, well, there was a man down the road, Charlie O'Brien, and he used to arrive on with an accordion, and he'd play music and they'd dance at the road and the crossroads, and that was normal.
For teenagers and younger people in their 20s, how would they socialise, or how might you meet partners or girls or boys?
The local dance, there used to be a dance of a Thursday night in the hall in Banff, and once you came to 16 or 17 you were allowed to go to that. And the women would line up at one side of the hall, and the boys would come in with their ties and collars and ties, and they'd stand at the other side and wait for the music, and they'd ask the ladies then. There was no such thing as ladies asking the gentlemen that time. It was all the men asked the other ones. And they brought out ladies' choice. I can remember that. And you'd be lucky if someone big joked in, you know.
Of course. And how important was religion when you were younger?
Oh, religion was very important. The rosary was said every night. The minute the tea was over, the mothers went down on the knees in the garden, and you could go off in and play for the rest of the night. But the rosary had to be said no matter what happened. And then you had to, once you got confirmation, you went to confession every month. And to take you about an hour and a half to go to confession, there'd be so many, you know. And that would be during the day now of a Saturday. You'd go to confession and you'd be home to your dinner. If you went up at 11 o'clock, you'd be home to your dinner at 1 o'clock. And a Saturday night, the adults would go and they'd be there for hours. The big change now is that you could go to confession any day now and you'd be back in 5 minutes. But if you go to Mass in the morning, everyone is going to Holy Communion. And I don't know who was right or who was wrong in that one, like, you know, but that was the way it was, like, you know. And another thing is, when you went to confession once a month, you went to Holy Communion at first Mass, whatever time the first Mass was. You couldn't get Holy Communion at second Mass. If you didn't go to first Mass, you wouldn't get Holy Communion.
And that time, of course, there was no Saturday night Mass.
Oh no, it's all Sunday. 2 Masses of Sunday. And
had you to fast before you received from the night before?
Oh yes, you fasted from 12 o'clock the night before. But sure, people, that time, in winter time in particular, they were fasting from 7 or 8 o'clock because they'd have their tea, and sure, they had to go to bed, everything in darkness, so they went to bed, and they got up in the morning and milked their cows, went to the creamery, and walked to bench or cycled to bench, you know. So a lot of people got weaknesses and everything, you know.
And every Friday would they observe the rule of no meat on a Friday?
Oh, no meat on a Friday.
And people adhered to that?
There was no, if you hadn't fish, you just had potatoes and butter. Everyone adhered to that, yes.
Yeah.
Did, yeah.
And would everyone have attended Mass? Would anybody have ever skipped Mass?
Well, if somebody missed Mass, I think the whole parish should be talking about it, you know.
Yeah.
They'd be missed, like, in other words, because when you went to Mass, everybody met outside the chapel gate. They discussed what happened during the week, matches, dances, whatever went on. It was all discussed. They could be 2 hours at Mass, you know. There was no hurry on anyone that time.
Given the choice, would you prefer to be a child growing up nowadays in 2013, or would you prefer to be a child growing up in the 40s?
God, it's a hard
30s
question.
or 40s?
It's a hard question, but I had a good childhood myself, I must say. I was one of the lucky ones. We were the lucky, and I think I'd prefer to be back in the old times. I think I would, yeah.
Thanks very much anyway, Larry, for agreeing to do the interview, and it's been very interesting. Thank you.